Thank you so much for being here this morning. Um, I want to just give you a little bit of background on what this is about, just very, very, very briefly. The overall goals of this three-part series, is first to place our life together here in this parish and our shared ministry into a little bit more of the wider context of the world around us and what's going on out there, and especially to take notice of a world that is increasingly suspicious of religion. We've read about this a lot over the last many years, actually, now. And I think it's useful and helpful for us just to name that directly and to try to figure out what that means for our life here, as this is a religious space, right? So what does that mean for our life here? And then number two, to put the significance of Eucharist, the Eucharistic table, into that mix. It's a religious rite, a religious ritual. So how do we think about this table in a world where people are suspicious of religion? What's that connection? How do we think about that? And then to articulate, third, why Eucharist is so central to Christian traditions, and how that might help us think about our witness in the wider world, and how that can help us bear witness to the gospel, the good news in the wider world, even in spite of or because of the suspicion of religion. Does that make sense for an overall three-part goal? Today, three things today for today's session. I thought we would have a little bit of conversation, shared inquiry about the word religion. What is that? And our own experience with the word, the concept of being religious. What does that mean? And then I'll make some observations, brief this morning, about how I find it useful to describe what religion is. And then I'll invite some more conversation about how that might relate to Eucharist. That's a big topic, actually, all of what I just said, for about 40 minutes. But we'll dive into it together, and we'll see how we go. And we'll end about 9:55 so that we have time to get ready for the 10:15 service. I wish I could have that. Stop doing that. You may not have had a chance to read the short little piece by Jessica Gross for today. If you did, that's part of our conversation. That New York Times writer who's been doing this amazing multiple-part series on religion in the United States. And what I invited us to read, which we can talk about at some point for today, is her... The headline of it is something like, people under 30 don't trust religion or much of anything else. So basically, people under 30 are suspicious of everything. And I'm the first to say there are probably good reasons for that. But I think it's important for us to notice that, especially as I'm guessing none of us here are under 30. And so how do we think about that pervasive sense of suspicion of religion in our society today? I'll pause there before doing this next bit. Are there any initial comments or questions that you have either regarding this overall three-part series or that Jessica Gross piece for today? Because we'll return to it. We all doing okay? Excellent. I want us to start just with our own experience with this huge word, religion. And today's topic, sort of audaciously, I guess, is how we can think about redeeming religion around a shared meal. And to remember that Eucharist is, in fact, a shared meal. Even though it's a tiny little wafer and even just dipped a little bit in some wine, it is a shared meal around a table. What does that have to do with religion? But before we try to tease that out, just religion. I'm going to invite you just to think on your own for a moment. And if there are people who are joining us via live stream this morning, please know that we've got people ready to take your questions and comments so that they can be shared with the group that is here on campus. We're just really glad that you can join us via live stream this morning. Here are, of course, three, again, questions. I'm inviting you just for a few moments. Think about your most typical, quintessential images of religion. What comes to mind when you think of this word? What do you think of when you see this word, religion? How does it feel? You know, the huge words like this carry emotions with them. They, to use contemporary language, they can trigger emotions, both good and bad. So how does it feel? How does this word feel? Where do you find religion? Where is it? It's not just sort of floating around out there somewhere. It's actually somewhere. Where do you find it? So just think about these three questions for just a few moments. I'll give you a little time on your own to think about that, just a few moments, and then we'll just do a little bit of sharing about that. Invite folks at home to do that who might be joining us via stream this morning as well. And I'll grab that. Thank you, Mike. So let me just invite, there are no, these are not right or wrong answers to questions. These are your own experience, which I think it might be useful to get into the room a little bit. So let me I'll play Phil Donahue here. Religion, what do you think of? How does it feel? Where is it? Julia, I think I just saw. And that microphone is mostly for those who are joining us at home.
For the religion, I know this isn't a definition of it, but when I think of religion, I think of denominations. I grew up Christian Reformed, then I was Reformed, then I was non-denominational, now I'm Episcopalian, and that's kind of what I think of religion.
Flavors.
Yes, and anyhow.
Bob.
For me, there's a negative connotation, and I think it's because of having been in very structured, quote, religious, unquote, situations beginning in from the primary grades going forward. I've been an Episcopalian all my life, but yet I feel constrained somehow when I think of religion.
It's a really important word you just used is structure, which we'll get back to. Here, grab the
Yeah, you have to stand. Thank you. When I think of religion, I think of the big ceremonies that you see coming out of Rome with the Pope and all of the formality. That, to me, you know, whether you like it or not, that's what I think of when I think of religion, that formality. How does it feel? It feels distant, like I can't touch that. It's just a little too structured, too organized, and I can't relate to it. And so, and where is it? I think when I think of religion, I think of it in those big, large settings with all the trappings and the robes and the candles and the whole thing. So that doesn't feel personal to me.
Thank you.
Similarly, I think of religion has to do with an institution. I sort of have that same image of some building, some structure. It could be, yes, a big cathedral or whatever. And how do I feel about it? I think it's rather suspect because I think
Even though
my
you're not under 30.
That's right. I still carry that. Because somehow, as I looked at that, I thought, what in my background brings up that suspicion? Well, one thing is it seemed to be in contrast to faith versus religion. My parents would never call themselves religious, even though they were. But they were people of faith. And religious is going through maybe formalities or having, you know, this label, and it may or may not be heartfelt or genuine.
Well, I agree with Marilyn because always when I have heard or seen the word religion, I view it as a very generic type of term. I almost think of it as basically something that someone might study in a secular university, religions of the world. And so it never has held any deep-seated connection with me. And I agree with Marilyn. The idea was faith, but then of course we need to define what is faith. It is your faith or another person's faith, or is it so-called Abrahamic faith? And so it is sort of a receding group of terms that are hard to define.
You guys are awesome. John.
Yes, I agree. I think more of faith versus religion, and I think maybe in a self-centered way, what is my faith, which is Christianity, but which is a religion overall, and that to me, that's the main religion is Christianity. But often when you think of the term, or I think of it, I associate with it a lot of negativity and a lot of hypocrisy and judgment and things like that. But so it's not a bad word, but it's not something I really think about a lot other than, like I said, to me the question is, what is my faith? What do I believe in? Which I guess is my religion, I suppose, in a self-centered way.
Anyone else? We can always come back to these questions if there's something that occurs to you that you want to get into the conversation, some thought. As I always used to say when I was teaching back in Berkeley, there's no statute of limitations on ideas or thoughts. If you have one, it's not too late ever to bring one back into the conversation. So feel free to do that. I want to, let me offer some, these have been really great ideas to get into the room. Let me offer a few things about religion from some other different perspectives for a moment to see what kind of thoughts or ideas that might stimulate for you all. And as you know, religion takes many different forms, right? This is an image of the Buddha under the Tree of Enlightenment. Now, some would vigorously argue that Buddhism is not a religion, but is instead a spiritual practice or a mindfulness technique. This gets at part of the complexities of trying to figure out what in the world does the word religion mean. This might look more religious This is in a Hindu temple. I'm not exactly sure of the location of this temple, but you can certainly tell by all the colors, all the figures, all the ornate kind of architecture that you're in a place of Hindu prayer and worship. This is reminding me of what Laura just said too. This is a Christian space, it's also ornate. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. It's the traditional location of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, and over the centuries, many different buildings have been erected over this site. It's almost like, you know, those, are they Fabergé eggs, the ones that have eggs inside an egg, inside an egg, inside, maybe, I don't know, it's a little, what am I thinking of? The dolls, the Russian dolls. That's what this is like. So where this bishop is standing is right where the first shrine, which would have been very small, probably, was erected, and then buildings got larger and larger over the space. And there are 3 different denominations that manage this particular site. So Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholic, I think there's a Protestant variety of some kind in there. But as you can see, there are things that people would recognize immediately as religious, right? Oh, where'd that come from? So we have a very sort of white American suburban family here with an American flag. What does this have to do with religion? Hold on to that question for just a few minutes, and we'll come back to that. This, by the way, is, I believe, comes from Church of St. Mary the Virgin in New York City, which is right on the edge of Times Square. It's an Episcopal church, a really large Episcopal church. It's often referred to as Smoky Mary's because of how much incense they used. This is where I did a summer internship, actually, way, way, way back in the many, many years ago. I want to, you all have been pointing to something this morning about difficulty with this question. It's really hard to define, to come up with some way of getting a definitive definition of what that word means. There's a religion scholar, she's retired now from University of California, Santa Barbara. Her name is Catherine Albanese. She wrote a book called America, Religion and Religions. And she spent a lot of time in her career trying to figure out, what is this word about? And where does it show up? And what does it look like? What she finally landed on in her career as a scholar is the realization that this word is actually impossible to define. But what you can do, and which all of you have been doing this morning, we can describe it. If we can't define it, we can describe it. So in her book, called America, she does that, and I find it useful. The first thing I'll say about this, one of the reasons why it's so hard to define, is that we don't even know where the word came from. Usually we know these things with big words that may mean a lot to us. There's a lot of disagreement about where the religion originated. Most scholars think it came from a mashup of 2 words, 2 Latin verbs. The first one, relegere, which means to reread. Reread. So the idea here is that you're passing something on. I've read it, now I'm going to give it to you to reread it. and then to you. Right? So there's a sense of passing something on. But there's another very similar word, religare. So religare and religare. This verb means to bind together. If you look at this a little bit, you can see, and actually I'll look at Steve Baker because I really appreciate this. There's a hint of our word ligament in here. So the idea is that ligaments bind bones together to form a skeleton. Without ligaments, the bones would just fall into a heap, right? So there's this sense in this verb, religare, of binding together. So what a lot of religion scholars think is that our word religion comes from a kind of mashup of these two Latin verbs. If so, that's kind of intriguing, I think, for this. A sort of, at least preliminary way of thinking about religion. It's some kind of transmitted tradition by which members of a community are bound together in a shared way of life. We pass something along, and it binds us together in some fashion. As a kind of big 30,000-foot level view, that's kind of helpful to me. But then Catherine Albanese comes along and says, well, let's describe what this then looks like out there in the world. She also does this in kind of broad terms, but I find this helpful too. And then I'll pause and see what you think of what she does here. She thinks religion has mostly to do with boundaries. Again, she's not trying to define religion so much as describe religion. So she talks about ordinary boundaries. So if I were to get really close like this, and forgive me for being this close. Did you notice I just asked for forgiveness for being this close? There's a boundary, right? And this is culturally understood, right? With people who are of European descent or white people, we have certain ways of understanding personal space. And we don't violate, there's an invisible magical circle, right, around people. And we don't cross it without either asking permission or asking forgiveness when we do it without asking permission. That's what Albanese means by an ordinary boundary. So religion for her sometimes shows up in cultural customs where certain boundaries are protected. Now she's very quick to note that boundaries are sometimes protected, but they're also transgressed, just like I did a moment ago. But I asked your forgiveness for doing that. So what religion does is sets a boundary and then tells us how you cross it appropriately. Does that make sense? So then she says, well, okay, we've got all these cultural customs. There are certain boundaries. We know what rules to follow, and we know what to do if we break them and cross them. There are also what's called extraordinary boundaries. And by the way, ordinary ones and extraordinary ones can also be geographical boundaries. So she does a lot of work. She did a lot of work on the United States of America and also the Americas, North and South America, and different indigenous groups as well as European settlers and so on. So she would talk and write a lot about rivers and mountains and plains as being both ordinary and extraordinary boundaries where you learn how to cross them or respect them and not cross them. She also would note, for example, an extraordinary boundary could be our own bodily limits. So if you think about it in terms of boundaries, sexual intimacy, for example, is the crossing of a bodily limit or boundary. And there are lots of rules about how that happens and about how you transgress those lines or boundaries. The most extraordinary boundary, Albanese would say, is of course the one that separates life from death. So there's a very clear, extraordinary boundary for what we mean by living and the dead. And lots of religious traditions will tell us how to cross that boundary. And why we have, for example, funeral liturgies that mark crossing that boundary, and so on. Here's a little bit more of what Albanese has done in describing. Remember, she's not trying to define religion, she's describing how it works. So, given the sense of boundaries, she says, religion generally has 4 component parts. And what I love, I'm a great alliteration fan. They all start with the letter C, so this is really fun for me. So, component parts of religion. There's always a creed, no matter what kind of religion. Creed just means, what do we think and believe about reality? What is it? What does it look like? How do we navigate it? What do we believe about reality itself? Based on what we believe, there's a code of behavior. So, for example, if we believe there's something in the universe called gravity, then we know that we shouldn't walk off a cliff, right? So there's a deep connection between what we believe about reality and how we live, creed and code. And then, this is a weird word, but don't be too alarmed by it. Cultus. Cultus is, we think of the word cult, of course, but what that refers to is ritual. Different patterns of ritual behavior. So if we believe certain things about how the universe works and it shapes our behavior, we will ritualize those insights. So we, actually I wasn't thinking of doing this gravity thing, but it's maybe working. If we believe that gravity is really a thing in the universe, then we're going to have this not stepping off a cliff, and maybe we'll have a little ritual about making sure that other people don't step off the cliff. We'll put up a fence, we'll have a sign, we'll grab people. You know exactly what I mean when I do this. It's a ritual gesture. So there are things we believe, how we behave, how we ritualize the behavior, and all of that creates a community. I was trying to use very ordinary ways of talking about that to make the point. But if you think about, here we are in a religious space, we believe in God, the Creator, Jesus, the Savior, the Spirit, the Sustainer. There are certain ways of living that come out of that. And we ritualize it around a table of a shared meal, and it creates a sense of community. Right? Now, here's a really intriguing thing that Albanese said about this, which is very much along the lines of ordinary boundaries. Notice that till just now, when I talked about our life here in this space, I wasn't saying anything about God or divinity in relation to religion. For Albanese, religion does not imply necessarily anything about God or divinity. It can, but that's not the essence necessarily of religion. Religion is about a creed that shapes your behavior and your ritual patterns for the sake of a community. That's why I had that picture of the family with the American flag up there. Because what Albanese would say is a sense of patriotic belonging to a country is a form of religion. We believe certain things about the origins of this country that shape our behavior or expectations. We have rituals around this. The Pledge of Allegiance, what we do with the American flag on a pole, etc. And it creates a sense, for good or for ill, a community, right? So one of the really interesting things, I'm offering all of this, this is sort of the bottom line, why I wanted to do this. I'll get to the bottom line just down here for a second. Notice, this is a religious space. That's the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. So Albanese would say this is very definitely like a temple in that religious sense. So religion describes a system of signs and symbols by which the community orients itself to the world with reference to boundaries. Sounds very abstract, but we do this. This is what we do when we gather in this space. We've got signs and symbols, and it orients us to how we're supposed to live, the hope we can have for our future, how we relate to each other in the world, and so on. And or, religion refers to the means by which human beings narrate, that should be narrate, their lives for the sake of meaning and belonging. I really like the active sense of telling stories and narrating as part of religion. We do that every week here. We read stories from that lectern right over there, right? We narrate our lives in some fashion. Here's what I wanted to get to. So, while some people may live without any gods, no one lives without religion. This was one of Albanese's really provocative notions. When people say, oh, no, I'm not religious. Oh, yes, you are. Because human beings always have some kind of creed, code, cultus, and a sense of community. You can be resisting it, but that just means you're not following the code, right? So what I'm inviting us to think about in relation to that Jessica Gross piece, and I'm sort of, I should be paying attention to the time. Good morning, David. Oh, good. We're okay. We've got just a few minutes, and we'll leave space to let you guys set up for the service. And then I want to hear what you all think about this. When Jessica Gross in that New York Times article is writing about the deep suspicion that people under 30 have of religion, she's not talking about this. She's talking about mostly institutionalized Christianity that is not speaking to where these folks under 30 want to be, or it's not meeting their needs, or they're tired of the hypocrisy, or they're sick of the scandals. You know, the list goes on and on and on. What I think can be helpful, just to put my cards on the table, is to invite those who have those suspicions to see if we can work together on making what happens in that religious space up there more meaningful for how they're navigating the world. The huge challenge for this is to get them to come through the door, because that's an entryway into a religious space. And so they're going to have all sorts of assumptions about what religion means, what it implies, what it entails, what's expected of them. It's why I talk so much about what's happening at the table, to demystify it a little bit, and to invite people to think about how important it is for us to narrate our lives with that kind of shared meal for the sake of a community. So I will stop there and just leave this up here. This is a 2nd or 3rd century fresco from, I believe it's in the catacombs in Rome. And as you can see, sort of by the shapes here, it's a community gathered around a shared meal. This is very early Christian worship, and it's around a table. I'll stop there and see if you have questions, observations, objections, addendums. Laura.
Jay, compelling, and I think final piece really when you think about trust, their religion.
Yes.
You can get them to feel
I had a student years ago talk about the very thing, Laura, and the student said, "Oh, so what you mean is the Super Bowl is our national revival meeting." Right, which made sense to me. It's like, you know, when you get huge people together, there are certain ways you behave, ritualized ways of behaving, and it creates this sense of community. That's Albany's notion of religion.
They also tie it into the flag.
Well, yes, on Super Bowl Sunday, yes, and other sporting events. The national anthem, absolutely. These are all these ritual, religious elements that show up everywhere in our lives. In some ways, some scholars would say we human beings are just naturally religious because of this need to figure out how to navigate the world together by some means. What we believe is true, how we behave, how we ritualize it, and come together.
I think everyone does have a deep need for, a deeper belief in something, and that I don't know if you don't believe in God, how you find that, but I think you do somehow, or you operationalize it some way, through whatever it is. Just maybe you have a meditation practice, but you don't necessarily believe in God, but because you're looking for that. And hopefully maybe as Christians we can, help people to meet that, or somehow use that as an end to share our beliefs with them.
Thank you, John. And this is a spoiler alert about the sermon that I'll be giving this morning. There are consequences when we don't have a clear sense of what we believe about reality, our code of conduct, and how we ritualize that. When that's absent, the gap is going to be filled in with other things. And a 20th century political philosopher I'll be mentioning this morning, Hannah Arendt, noted that in that gap comes totalitarianism and authoritarianism and demagogues and ways of helping people navigate reality for the sense of meaning and community. I got the 5-minute warning signal from the back. Is there any last little... So I hope this tees us up. That's a weird way. I don't usually use sports metaphors. You got me on a sports metaphor. For the next 2 sessions in this series, next week, I want to be suggesting a little bit more about why the kind of table fellowship that Jesus practiced as a kind of religious ritual was so revolutionary and in many ways contributed to his death. Those are the consequences of religious practice. But I want to talk about that table fellowship in relation to what we do there. That's next week. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you those of you who may have been joining us via live stream. And join us next week. And worship starts in about 20 minutes, I think. And thank you. I'll start cleaning this stuff away, and I'm pointing at David, and we'll get everybody set up.